Before we begin, let us know where you're listening from. After the story, rate it from 1 to 10. Now let's start. The Montana sky stretched endlessly above Harper Walker as she clutched her infant daughter to her chest, the bitter January wind cutting through her threadbare coat. Her eyes darted nervously behind her as she stumbled down the frozen dirt road, each labored breath visible in the frigid air. The baby, only 3 weeks old, whimpered softly against her mother's racing heart. "Hush now, Lily," Harper whispered, adjusting the blanket to shield the newborn's face from the biting cold. "Just a little further. He won't find us here." The bruises on Harper's face had faded from purple to a sickly yellow, but the terror in her eyes remained fresh. She'd waited until Frank had passed out drunk before gathering what little she could carry and fleeing the isolated cabin they called home. The cabin where, just 3 weeks ago, Frank Walker had flown into a rage upon discovering his firstborn child was a girl. "Worthless," he'd spat, hurling a bottle against the wall as Harper cradled their newborn daughter. "I needed a son, someone to carry on my name, not another useless mouth to feed." The memory of his words stung sharper than the cold as Harper continued her desperate trek toward the neighboring ranch, the only place she could think to go. The Oakley Ranch lay 5 miles from the Walker property, and though Harper had never spoken more than a few words to the owner, she'd heard he was a decent man. More importantly, he was the only neighbor for miles who might be willing to help a desperate woman and her infant before Frank sobered up and came looking for them. The sun was beginning to set when Harper spotted the wooden arch marking the entrance to the Oakley Ranch. Her legs threatened to give way beneath her as relief washed over her exhausted body. Through the trees, she could make out the warm glow of windows in a large farmhouse, smoke curling from the chimney against the darkening sky. As Harper stumbled up the long driveway, a tall figure emerged from the barn, leading a chestnut mare. Even in the fading light, she could see his broad shoulders and the careful way he handled the horse. When he turned and spotted her approaching, he froze for a moment before quickly securing the horse and striding toward her. "Ma'am," his voice carried across the yard, deep but gentle. "Are you all right?" Harper opened her mouth to respond, but the words wouldn't come. After 20 hours of walking, of fear and exhaustion, her body finally surrendered. Her knees buckled beneath her as darkness crept in at the edges of her vision. The last thing she remembered was strong arms catching her and her daughter before they hit the ground, and a concerned face with kind eyes looking down at her. "I've got you," the man said. "You're safe now." When Harper awoke, she was lying on a comfortable sofa beneath a thick quilt, the crackling of a nearby fire warming her chilled bones. For a moment, panic seized her. Where was Lily? She bolted upright, ignoring the pain that shot through her body. "Your daughter's right here," came a calm voice from across the room. "She's fine." Harper turned to see a man in his early 30s sitting in a rocking chair, her baby cradled expertly in his arms. He was feeding her from a bottle, his large hands surprisingly gentle as they supported the tiny infant. "I figured you'd need to rest," he explained, his blue eyes meeting hers. "She was hungry, so I warmed some milk. Hope that's okay." Harper nodded, studying the stranger who had taken them in. He had a weathered face that spoke of years working outdoors, but his eyes were kind, the corners crinkling as he smiled down at the baby. "I'm Preston Oakley," he said, rising carefully from the chair and bringing Lily over to her mother. "And you're on my ranch." "Harper Walker," she replied, taking her daughter with trembling hands. "And this is Lily. Thank you for helping us." Preston nodded, moving to pour a cup of coffee from a pot on the stove. "You want to tell me what brings a woman and her newborn out in this weather, looking like they've been running from something?" Harper clutched Lily closer, the weight of her situation suddenly overwhelming. Tears welled in her eyes as she considered how to explain. What if Preston knew Frank? What if he sent them back? "My husband," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. He wanted a son. When Lily was born." She trailed off, unable to continue. Preston's expression darkened as he handed her the coffee mug. "You don't need to say more if you don't want to, but you should know you're safe here." "He'll come looking," Harper warned, her eyes darting toward the window. "When he wakes up and finds us gone." "Let him," Preston said firmly, his jaw set. "This is my property. No one comes here causing trouble without answering to me." Something in his tone made Harper believe him. and for the first time in years, she felt a small spark of hope. Over the next few days, Harper and Lily settled into a spare bedroom in Preston's sprawling farmhouse. Though the ranch was large, Preston ran it with just a few hired hands who lived in a bunkhouse near the stables. The house itself had belonged to his parents, both now passed, and felt too big for just one person. "My mother would have loved having a baby in the house again," Preston remarked one evening as he watched Harper rock Lily by the fire. "She always wanted grandchildren." Harper smiled softly. "You never married?" Preston shook his head, returning his attention to the ledger on his desk. "Never found the right person, I suppose. The ranch keeps me busy enough." But Harper noticed how his eyes lingered on Lily, how naturally he held her when Harper needed a moment's rest. For a man who claimed to have little experience with children, he seemed to have an instinctive understanding of what the baby needed. On the fourth morning, Harper was in the kitchen preparing breakfast when she heard the sound of an approaching vehicle. The spatula clattered from her hand as she rushed to the window, her heart hammering in her chest. A mud-splattered truck was rumbling up the driveway, and even from a distance, she recognized it instantly. Frank had found them. "Preston," she called out, panic rising in her throat. "He's here." Preston appeared from the hallway, his expression calm but alert. "Stay inside with Lily. Lock the bedroom door and don't come out until I call for you." Harper wanted to protest, to warn him about Frank's temper and the gun he usually kept in his truck, but Preston was already moving toward the front door, his shoulders set with determination. Through the bedroom window, Harper watched as Frank's truck skidded to a stop in the yard. Her husband emerged, his face contorted with rage, a rifle clutched in one hand. "Oakley," Frank bellowed, "I know you've got my wife and kid in there. Send them out now." Preston stood on the porch, his stance relaxed but vigilant. "Morning, Walker. What brings you by?" Frank spat on the ground. "Don't play dumb with me. That ungrateful woman took off with my child. They belong to me, and I'm taking them home." "Nobody belongs to anybody," Preston replied evenly. "And from what I can see, they left for good reason." Frank raised his rifle, pointing it directly at Preston. "Get out of my way, or I swear to God." "You'll what?" Preston didn't flinch. "Shoot me on my own property? In front of witnesses?" He nodded toward the bunkhouse, where several ranch hands had emerged, all watching the confrontation closely. Frank's eyes darted around, seemingly noticing the audience for the first time. His grip on the rifle tightened. "That woman is my wife. That woman," Preston said, taking a step forward, "has bruises all over her body. That woman was terrified enough to walk 20 miles in freezing weather with a newborn rather than stay with you. What kind of man does that make you, Frank?" For a moment, Harper thought Frank might pull the trigger anyway. His face flushed dark with anger, his finger twitching near the trigger. But then, slowly, he lowered the rifle. "This isn't over," he growled. "She can't hide here forever." "Actually, she can," Preston replied. "And if you come back here threatening anyone again, I'll have the sheriff out here so fast your head will spin. Now get off my property." Frank glared at Preston for a long moment before climbing back into his truck. As he reversed down the driveway, he rolled down his window and shouted, "Tell Harper she's dead to me. Her and that useless girl." Preston didn't respond, standing motionless until Frank's truck disappeared from view. Only then did his shoulders relax slightly as he turned back toward the house. Inside, Harper sat trembling on the edge of the bed, Lily sleeping peacefully in her arms despite the commotion. When Preston knocked gently on the door, she jumped. "He's gone," Preston said through the wood. "You're safe." Harper unlocked the door, her eyes searching Preston's face. "For now, he'll be back. Then we'll be ready." Preston's voice was calm, certain. "But in the meantime, there's something I need to show you." Curious, Harper followed Preston to his office, where he unlocked a drawer and pulled out a manila folder. "I made some calls after you arrived," he explained, laying out several documents on the desk. "These are the forms for a restraining order against Frank. And these," he continued, pointing to another set of papers, "are divorce proceedings. If you want to file them." Harper stared at the papers, her hands shaking. I can't afford a lawyer. My family's attorney is handling it. Don't worry about the cost." When Harper began to protest, Preston held up a hand. "Consider it an investment in your future." And Lily's. Tears welled in Harper's eyes. Why are you doing all this for us? You barely know me. Preston was quiet for a moment, his gaze falling on Lily. My mother, he finally said, was like you once. She ran from my father when I was just a boy. We were lucky. A kind family took us in until she could get back on her feet. His eyes met Harper's. I'm just paying it forward. As winter gave way to spring, life on the Oakley Ranch fell into a comfortable routine. Harper, determined not to be a burden, insisted on earning her keep. She took over the cooking and much of the housekeeping, skills she'd perfected as Frank's wife, but now performed with a sense of pride rather than fear. The divorce proceedings moved forward, with Frank conspicuously absent from the required hearings. According to Preston's attorney, he'd taken to drinking heavily and rarely left the cabin these days. Good riddance, Harper muttered when she heard the news, though a small part of her felt a twinge of sadness for the man she'd once believed she loved. As for Preston, he proved to be unlike any man Harper had ever known. He treated her with a respect she'd forgotten she deserved, valuing her opinions and never raising his voice even when they disagreed. With Lily, he was endlessly patient, spending evenings rocking her to sleep when Harper was exhausted or walking the floors with her during colicky nights. You're good with her, Harper remarked one evening as Preston sat on the porch swing, Lily sleeping contentedly against his chest. He smiled down at the baby, now almost 5 months old. She makes it easy. Smart little thing, isn't she? She knows who cares for her, Harper said softly, sitting beside them on the swing. Children have a sense about these things. As she spoke, Harper realized how close they were sitting, their shoulders nearly touching. In the golden light of sunset, Preston's profile was strong and kind, his eyes crinkling at the corners as he smiled down at Lily. Something warm unfurled in Harper's chest, a feeling she'd nearly forgotten existed. Preston must have sensed her gaze, for he turned to meet her eyes, his expression softening. For a moment, Harper thought he might say something, might acknowledge the unspoken thing growing between them. Instead, he gently transferred the sleeping Lily into her arms. I should check on the new foal, he said, rising from the swing. Don't wait up for me. Harper watched him walk toward the stables, wondering if she'd imagined the moment between them. Perhaps Preston saw her only as a responsibility, a good deed he was committed to seeing through. The thought left her feeling hollow. Later that night, after putting Lily to bed, Harper stood at her bedroom window, gazing out at the star-filled sky. She'd come so far from the terrified woman who had arrived at the ranch 6 months ago, but the future still felt uncertain. The divorce would be finalized soon, and then what? She couldn't impose on Preston's generosity forever. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Preston stood in the hallway, looking uncharacteristically nervous. Sorry to disturb you, he said. I saw your light was still on. Is everything all right? Harper asked, concerned by his serious expression. Yes. No. I don't know. He ran a hand through his hair. Could we talk? Downstairs. Harper followed him to the kitchen, where he busied himself making tea, his back to her as he spoke. I've been thinking, he began, his voice carefully measured, about what happens after your divorce is final. Harper's stomach tightened. Here it was, the conversation she'd been dreading. He was going to ask her to leave. I understand if you want us to find our own place, she said quickly. You've done more than enough already, and I've been saving from the work I've been doing for Mrs. Patterson in town. What? No. Preston turned to face her, confusion evident in his expression. That's not what I was going to say at all. Oh. Harper felt her cheeks warm with embarrassment. Preston set the tea aside, untouched, and took a deep breath. What I was trying to say, badly, it seems, is that I don't want you to go. Either of you. He met her eyes directly. These past months, having you and Lily here, it's like the house is finally a home again. Harper's heart quickened. What are you saying, Preston? I'm saying I care about you, Harper. More than I should, perhaps, given everything you've been through. He moved closer, his voice gentle. I'm not expecting anything. I know you need time and space, and I'll respect whatever boundaries you set. But I wanted you to know that you have a place here, for as long as you want it. Tears welled in Harper's eyes as she absorbed his words. After years with Frank, where love had twisted into control and fear, Preston's offer of care, without conditions, felt almost too good to be true. I care about you too, she whispered, the admission both terrifying and freeing. But I'm afraid. Not of you, she added quickly, seeing his expression. Of myself. Of making another mistake. Preston nodded, understanding in his eyes. We can take it as slow as you need. One day at a time. One day at a time, Harper agreed, a small smile forming through her tears. Summer bloomed across the ranch, painting the fields with wildflowers and filling the air with the sweet scent of clover. Lily grew stronger each day, her delighted laughter becoming a familiar soundtrack to life on the Oakley Ranch. She took her first steps in the kitchen garden, toddling unsteadily between Harper and Preston as they cheered her on. The divorce became final in July, granting Harper full custody of Lily. Frank, who had finally appeared at the last hearing looking haggard and unkempt, hadn't contested the arrangement. He'd merely glared at Harper across the courtroom before stumbling back to his truck. He's drinking himself to death, Preston observed grimly as they drove home from the courthouse. Sheriff says he barely leaves the cabin anymore. Harper stared out the window at the passing landscape. I should feel something, shouldn't I? Relief, or sadness, or something. But I just feel numb. Preston reached across the seat to take her hand. You feel however you feel. There's no right way to process all of this. That evening, they celebrated Harper's freedom with a small dinner on the porch, watching fireflies dance across the fields as Lily slept peacefully inside. Preston had opened a bottle of champagne, and the bubbles made Harper feel lightheaded and brave. Do you remember the first night I came here? She asked, leaning back in her chair. How frightened I was. Preston nodded, his eyes reflecting the soft glow of the lantern between them. You were the strongest person I'd ever seen, walking all that way to protect your daughter. I didn't feel strong, Harper admitted. I felt desperate. But you made me feel safe for the first time in years. Their eyes met across the table, and something shifted in the air between them. Slowly, deliberately, Preston stood and moved to her side, kneeling beside her chair. Harper, he said softly, taking her hand in his. I know it hasn't been that long, and I promised we'd take things slow. But I need you to know that I love you. I love Lily. And if you'll let me, I want to spend the rest of my life showing you both what love is supposed to be. Harper's breath caught in her throat. She'd known, somewhere deep inside, that this moment was coming, had perhaps been inevitable since that first day. What surprised her was her own certainty as she looked into Preston's honest eyes. Yes, she whispered, leaning forward to press her forehead against his. Yes to all of it. Their first kiss was gentle, a promise exchanged in the warm summer night. When they finally parted, Preston's smile was brighter than the stars overhead. There's something else, he said, reaching into his pocket. I've been carrying this around for weeks, waiting for the right moment. He produced a small velvet box and opened it to reveal a delicate ring with a single pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds. It was my grandmother's. Simple, but special. Harper stared at the ring, overwhelmed by what it represented. Preston, are you asking? I am, he confirmed, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. Will you marry me, Harper? Will you and Lily become my family, officially? Tears spilled down Harper's cheeks as she nodded, unable to speak past the emotion tightening her throat. When Preston slipped the ring onto her finger, it fit perfectly, as though it had been waiting for her all along. They were married in October, beneath the ancient oak tree behind the farmhouse. Lily, now walking confidently, served as their flower girl, scattering red and gold leaves instead of petals. The ceremony was small, just a few neighbors and the ranch hands who had become like family, but filled with more joy than Harper had believed possible a year ago. As they exchanged vows, promising to cherish and protect one another, Harper caught sight of a figure at the edge of the property. Frank stood watching from a distance, leaning against his truck. He looked thinner than she remembered, his clothes hanging loosely on his frame. For a moment, their eyes met across the distance, and Harper felt a complicated mix of emotions: pity, residual fear, and finally, release. Frank nodded once, a gesture Harper couldn't quite interpret, before climbing into his truck and driving away. It was the last time she would ever see him. Later, as Preston led her in their first dance as husband and wife, Harper told him about Frank's appearance. Are you okay? Preston asked, concern evident in his eyes. Harper considered the question carefully before answering. Yes, she said with quiet certainty. I think that was the final page of that chapter. It's over now. Preston pulled her closer, his hand warm against the small of her back. And a new one begins. As the sun set over the Oakley Ranch, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, Harper looked around at the life she had found here. At Preston dancing with Lily perched on his shoulders, at the home they had built together, at the future stretching before them like an open road. She had arrived a year ago with nothing but a newborn daughter and desperate hope. Now she had everything she had never dared to dream of: safety, love, and the knowledge that Lily would grow up knowing only kindness from the man she would call father. Some wounds took time to heal, and Harper knew there would still be nights when the memories of her past with Frank would wake her, trembling. But Preston would be there, his steady presence a reminder that she was no longer that frightened woman on a frozen road. They had saved each other in different ways, and in doing so, they had created something beautiful from the broken pieces of the past. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Preston returned to her side, Lily sleeping against his shoulder. He wrapped his free arm around Harper, drawing her close as they gazed up at the vast Montana sky. "Happy?" he asked simply. Harper leaned into his embrace, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her cheek. "More than I ever thought possible," she answered truthfully. And in that moment, surrounded by the family she had found, Harper Walker Oakley knew that some journeys, no matter how difficult their beginning, led exactly where they were meant to.